Thank you, Gene, and welcome again, everybody. As Gene mentioned, Mark Johnson is quite well-traveled. He's the Vietnam War conscientious objector. He spent 28 years with the YMCA, including a position as director of the Y in Lebanon. This is his 5th year as executive director for the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And as part of the new strategic plan, Demilitarizing Life and Land, Mark has been traveling to connect with local chapters, affiliates, and religious peace groups. He has been in 30 states, attended over 70 meetings, met over 300 people in his recent trips. I guess that's since Christmas.
Just before Christmas.
Since just before Christmas. Today, Mark is here and will discuss the anti-war movement, particularly the April 9th demonstrations in New York and San Francisco that tested the efforts to rally the public continuing opposition to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, without further ado, Mark Johnson.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for this invitation. My first visit to Louisville with FOR was very early in my tenure, about a little over 4 years ago, and so it's good to be back. I hate to leave even this much time between visits, but it's certainly great to see Jean Edwards as youthful and in charge as she was 4 years ago. We all continue to miss George, and I'm sure as she does as a partner in that work. But the national headquarters were real proud of the work that gets done in Louisville under the name of FOR. I'm in fact traveling to figure out what's being done in our name. Our 501c3 status is shaped in part by what happens in 45 chapters and 65 affiliates across the country. I also want to open with an unpaid political advertisement. I don't think Bruce Scott or Kat have made it to lunch today. They may still show up. This is a local author of yours, Bruce W. Scott, in his new book, When Time Ends, The Victory of Forgiveness at Armageddon. If you've seen Time magazine this week, the cover is dedicated to Rob Bell's new book, Love Wins. Well, the cover should have been dedicated to Bruce Scott's When Time Ends. This is the argument, this is the answer to the religious right and its dispensationalist apocalyptic message about Israel and the end times. But it's wonderfully researched, powerfully written, and the sale of every book profits FOR. The proceeds from the sale go to the Fellowship of Reconciliation. So another reason to look for Bruce Scott's When Time Ends. There's a significantly enough different audience here compared to the group we met with last night that I'm going to open with a poem that I shared last night as well. In the history of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, one of its more important services has been in support of conscientious objection and conscientious objectors. And one of our more famous conscientious objectors was William Stafford, sometimes called the poet laureate of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, a conscientious objector during the Second World War when he served in the Civilian Conservation Corps as a fire jumper and a trail mender in California. And he wrote poetry throughout that and throughout his life. On his birthday each year, FOR chapters gather around the country to read William Stafford's poetry. But this is, the title of this poem is The Way It Was. And it was written the year I was born, 1947, and it really sort of describes my life in this work. The way it was. I haven't saved the world today, though many of my friends have been asking me to. But while I was so busy trying to be a good neighbor, a war began between the Arabs and the Jews. And halfway across the country, my congressman invited 200 million Russians to come over and fight. I haven't saved the world today, and it's almost night. The urgency of the message, the prophetic voice, is no less current today than it was in 1947. And I am a believer of the notion that finally come the prophets, finally come the poets, that poetry will lead us to understand what we need to do in the world and give us our voice. So I've been invited, Terry Taylor and I agreed that I would describe the state of the peace movement in the world today. And I will conclude with some remarks around the April 9th event under the banner of the United National Anti-War Committee in New York on April 9th and San Francisco. But I want to lead us to that as a conclusion with these remarks. They're a little more formal than my conversation last night, and so I'd like to begin. The anti-war movement is alive, if not well. It is committed and active in international peacemaking at an increasingly systemic and structural level. But the forces aligned to contain its impact are also increasingly sophisticated. Case in point, over the U.S. 2010 Memorial Day weekend, a flotilla of vessels carrying humanitarian aid to the Palestinians of Gaza was attacked in the dead of night by Israeli naval forces. At least 9 people were killed, including a 19-year-old Turkish American. Some boats were escorted to the Israeli port of Ashdod, where tents had been erected for processing over 600 activists on those boats to be imprisoned and sent home. Consider the logistics of 6 ships carrying members of government from European nations and at least 30 countries overall. At least 1 Nobel Peace Prize winner, and loaded with goods for humanitarian aid, for reconstruction, education, and health care. This is a testament to the capacity to organize. And I suspect you know that at the end of May, there will be another flotilla. A U.S. boat to Gaza will go under the title of the Audacity of Hope. This was on the heels of 1,400 people from 42 nations who gathered in Egypt at the beginning of the year to enter Gaza in protest of a continuing blockade of that prison-like encampment. From the earliest days of a 6-month organizing effort, a faith-based grounding in Gandhian satyagraha was a part of the planning process. Ira Grouper was a part of that gathering, and we had a number of wonderful conversations of his long history in the work of civil rights and human rights globally, and I'm glad Ira's here today. Training in active nonviolence took place in full public view in downtown Cairo on Tahrir Square, and served over the course of the week to shift the engagement with the police force containing the protests. Banner headlines and full-color photographs were on the front page of major Egyptian newspapers. Flash crowds, cell phones, and small group meetings in a dozen languages coordinated a continually shifting response to the Egyptian government's pressures. Despite the failure to move more than 100 of those of us who went to Egypt across the border into Rafah, a global response of the digital media carried the messages of the protest around the world. There were over 1,200 digital media reports of that gathering, almost one for every one of us there.